Welcome to the Vietnamese American Chamber of Commerce video series on how I did it. I have a very special guest with me today, and we're going to go right into it. Can you please share your name and where are you originally from?
Yes, this is conducted in English, so I'll say my name in the English version, American version, which is Anh Tuan Lê. Vietnamese would be Lê Anh Tuan. And originally I'm all over the place actually, but I was born in Hanoi, Vietnam. And I've lived in my youth in Europe, worked in Europe, and came to the United States when I was a preteen. And I consider Michigan kind of my first home. And then after college, I spent 30-some years in San Francisco. And now, as things turned out, after 10 years in Hawaii, I'm here in Orange County in Westminster. I think I'm destined to be here. This is home for me now.
Very good. And what motivated you to pursue your current field, profession, or business?
You know, I think of kids today, they're exposed to so many things that I find them often, it's difficult for them to decide what they want to do. And I understand that. In my days, I was like a kid in a candy store with so many interests, ranging from science and technology to the arts and literature and so on, that there's so many things I could have done, but I decided quickly to become a civil engineer. And I have to admit, it was really the Vietnam War experience and seeing the war and played out each night on CBS News, and the destruction of what is very close to my parents' heart, their homeland and their home city, that influenced me to become a civil engineer. So I studied so that I one day, like many of us at that time, with the intention of returning to Vietnam, hopefully after the war, to rebuild. So that was my motivation.
What are some of the challenges or obstacles that you faced along the way?
So we're still talking about the profession and work and what we do for a living. Looking back, I feel very fortunate that the big motivation for me was to return to Vietnam. So I absorbed every opportunity I could to get experience here in the US, loving what I did. And there was a steady rise in responsibilities. And looking back, I saw that my supervisors often assigned the toughest and stickiest problems to me. And often it's areas that I've not done before, but somehow they trusted me that I would deliver. And I think the qualities that allowed them to do that was I had a broad interest in many things, a curiosity about many things, and also kind of built-in integrity to make sure that I document it and it's compliant with physical laws and codes and so on, so that it would withstand independent checking, which is very important in our field of engineering for public safety purpose. So looking back, I had good supervisors, and they were, in the way they supervised me, good mentors. And I realized through this that the job of the engineer is awesome, particularly those of us working in public works, is the public depends on our integrity and our thoroughness. And then looking back, I also saw that, Dan, that those people who were my most memorable supervisors were all immigrants. They were from Europe and Latin America, and I see, looking back, I realized they probably saw a spark in me that comes with being a new American, being a recent immigrant, in which there was curiosity, there was a confidence and competence, and a sense of trustworthiness. And I made sure I was my most challenging or my most difficult critic. And then 1975 was really a life-changing experience, because here I was aiming to go back to Vietnam, but in 1975, as you know, the government changeover and the Vietnamese came here. In fact, your dad and I were discussing what we would do here and then what we would do when we go back to Vietnam. But the Vietnamese came here, so our mission field was right here. And it changed what I was doing because for many of us in the field, it was really to climb the ladder, and professional career and so on. But all of a sudden I was faced with a lot of people needing help to write their resumes for training, for jobs referral, for sponsorship, economic support. And in the Bay Area, San Francisco and San Jose, I was a safety net to a lot of people, a lot of families, particularly involved with the church. And so I saw the need to do that on a more formal basis, and I started my own firm. And by starting my own firm, I allowed opportunities for training of Vietnamese refugees. Some of them were soldiers, artillery people. But I figure artillery people could also translate that into geometry to do electrification wires for San Francisco streetcars, So that I saw in these people that came here, including my own family and my in-laws. But I couldn't convince that of the mainstream firms that I work with. They would come in. I know they could do the job, but because of the color of their skin, the accent, and they look different, they would never have a chance to do a job other than janitorial or maybe at most electronic assembly. So there were challenges for me that I had to overcome, but I realized the experience of that helped me to see it from the refugee standpoint. And so I didn't plan my career that I'd be here assisting refugee communities, but that's how it turned out, just as with your family too, Dan, I remember with your clan. So, yeah.
What are some of the achievements or successes that you are most proud of?
I would say kind of in a modest way, going way back, was I didn't realize what an achievement was, but I graduated from high school when I was barely 16. I got my master's when I was barely 20. I got my license when I was 22, even though the minimum age was 25. I wrote the state board and they allowed me to take the test. And even though I wasn't a citizen then, I passed all that. And so I was the youngest professional engineer license and the youngest structural engineer, which usually people take 6 to 10 times to pass that structural engineering test because of the California's tough earthquake requirements. I would think on another level is that I used what I did, my profession, as a way of helping the refugee community, or some of them were my family and my in-laws. And I guess besides being a bridge engineer, I became a bridge in many ways amongst communities, bridging the refugee community to the mainstream, helping defend, their preservation of housing stock in San Francisco. You probably heard about that in the Tenderloin, which is where many of the refugee and boat people lived, but it was going to be demolished or sold to hotel developers. And we fought that battle, and it's now uptown, even though it has its issues, uptown San Francisco. So it's become a neighborhood and community of its own. And it helped a lot with the planning, the advocacy, and the housing issues there. But I guess one of the things I look back on in the U.S.-Vietnam relationship, just like your dad, is we live a life of reconciliation. And I've always felt that in my business role, in the things that I did, I was able to have a platform to help with the U.S.-Vietnam roadmap for normalization. And this started with George Bush 1. And then I was asked to help with the Clinton state visit and help strategize in the speeches and the speakers of all that, and actually formed a Vietnamese American delegation to go along, which wouldn't have happened if certain people within Commerce and State Department didn't, push me to do it and says, this is really necessary so that we are seen as a community. And that would have benefit both for the U.S. and Vietnam and our own selves. And it was a moving experience. I didn't myself participate there, even though the White House says that we got a plane waiting for you for the state dinner. But I was taking care of my terminally ill mother at that time. But it was very moving because for many of the young people, it was their first time to come back when they're fully adult and understand in the year 2000, Clinton's state visit, what it means to be a Vietnamese and having been safe from the war and come back. And I just talked to one of them the other day. He's now in his 50s or early 60s. But he says, you know, Antoine, what you did then, I still keep your communications, your letters and your draft speeches and the things really inspired us. And we're still doing this. We're still the bridge to bring our peoples together, technology transfer, educational exchange, seeing our uniqueness that as Vietnamese Americans to do something for America and Vietnam to better the lot of our people. So that's very gratifying to me to hear that just this last week. I didn't even think about that. It's so long time ago, from 23 years ago. But it was, I would say, if I had to rest today, you know, that would have been my return. I didn't get to return to Vietnam to work as an engineer, mind you, but at least there's a residual value in what we did together. So, yeah, thank you for that question. That's a very I could have more, but that's about it for now. Yeah.
How do you balance your work and your personal life in today's busy age?
That's a very popular question to ask, and I think you try to do that in a way that's right. There's never enough time for your family, particularly the children as they grow up, because they grow up so fast. But in my case, you know, looking back, I had crisis after crisis in terms of personal demands of family, not just refugees and boat people coming. And you probably remember that because we're living here, but we don't have normal lives. We're constantly thinking of people back home, sending money home, sending jeans and stuff that they can sell in the black market so they can buy their way to come on a boat and so on. Hopefully they make it. So that was constant in our, you know, in our mind and our economic plan, our budgeting. And so to me, the toughest was, how do you balance it when you have caregiving? Because in my case, it was my terminally ill mom, my mentally disabled son, eventually my wife who had cancer, and then my mother-in-law who had Alzheimer's. So that gave me a very intriguing view of what caregiving is. And I realized it's a woodworks. It's not, there's like a $1 trillion worth of, you know, of value in this, but very little is done to help the caregiver, and often the caregiver suffers the most. In my case, it impacted my business, probably my health also, but the resources aren't always plain. You have to search for them. You eventually do the best you can. Eventually, I had to close my company for different reasons, but a lot of it having to do with caregiving to a loved one being a priority. And so, as a result, I took a degree in healthcare executive MBA, and that was my capstone project: how to design facilities and improve the value of strip malls so that they become, you know, in-home care, reduce the cost of hospital care. And that was my promise to myself, but I got distracted by the call to serve in Hawaii, which I had my proposal, my resume in. But now I'm back after 10 years on the Hawaii project and returning to that commitment or that promise or that vision of caregiving and how to create communities where you have a safety net and that you can reduce the cost of healthcare, and that healthcare is not just medical, but also well-being communities, economically, socially, you know, all those aspects that I don't think developers are building. If you look at it, you get into the area where it's my sermonette is on, we're really divided by the dependency on cars. You know, we're so dependent on cars. We're just learning how harmful it is to our health and our climate or our planet. And the new policies, the new funding, new regulations are favoring the way we should be living, the way we normally live. Even your own clan, they made sure they bought homes that were close together. They can walk between backyards and things like that. That's the way we should be living. But it's not being built for us in that way. And God willing, the next few years of my life, that's what I'm going to do, devote it to Westminster, first of all. So that's my pivot.
Oh, very good. How do you stay connected to your Vietnamese heritage and culture?
It's a natural for me because I've always felt a uniqueness of who I am. During the war, I had passing thoughts as to, why am I from a country which is on the news 3, 4, 5 clips a night? Vietnam is never off the lips of Americans, and it was always topic number one. And even today, there are lessons to be learned about that. And it has a meaning of its own, and even our food and our culture is very much, bánh mì and pho, and all that is very much part of the American culture now. So we can't help it. It's an accident of history, if we will. But I don't think there's any accident. I think we're here for a purpose. I find, at least in my case, once I reconcile to the fact that I'm Vietnamese American, which means there's something good about each of those that I can combine and become who I am to make it better for, our communities, and be able to kind of discern, what's unique and what's different, and to bring that kind of improved version, the salt of the earth, that we can influence our surroundings. And so part of it, I think, growing up in a family in which we were insulated from the outside world, in the sense, because every night we'd have devotion. And my mother would lead devotion in the Vietnamese Bible. And my father worked with the Gideon Bible camp when he came back from the States from studies. And so the Gideon Bible became my way of learning English. I had an English Gideon Bible, and I would have to listen to his interpreting for missionaries. That's how I learned, the language. And every session I would have at least 10 words. And so when I came to the U.S., they say, your English is very good, but it sounds like King James Version, the way you talk. So, but I think once it's in you, and when I went to University of Michigan, it was a topic of the day because it was very, progressive and very anti-war. And there'd be newspapers at the International Center. So I learned my Vietnamese by just immersion and amongst Vietnamese friends. And now I'm traveling with Elan, almost every weekend. She's kind of the cultural icon for our community. And especially going back to Vietnam, we're probably more Vietnamese than the Vietnamese themselves, because, if you remember the history, there was a long period of censorship in Vietnam. And so a lot of those songs that are very popular for us and your dad's generation are kind of heard the first time, experienced the first time with people like Elan performing them. And there's a difference, because those were born out of an era, out of a culture that is very Vietnamese before it became political, and there was censorship. So in a way, people called me, Antoine, when you come back, you're like a Vietnamese frozen in time. Because when I go back to Hanoi, I speak the old Hanoi accent. A lot of our mannerisms, a lot of our jargon is old, and our kind of politesse. There's a certain, kind of a courtesy in the way we speak that they're trying to learn, but sometimes that's hard because it's all mixed up now. It's kind of street talk, a lot of that. So, yeah. Anyway, I hope I answered your question. A very Vietnamese in a way, but a world citizen. I think foremost, I think your dad was very much influencing me on that, because he says there's no north or south. I think your dad was a proponent of that. We're all of the same family, and And I thought that was very powerful. I always remind myself that when I see what's going on in the Middle East, it hurts me as if it's very personal.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. We're down to a couple last questions. What are some of the values or principles that guide you in both your work and your personal life?
I think most of my professional life has been as a consultant. I didn't work except for 5 years in government here in Orange County. And as a consultant, it's a different animal. It's not like you're a bureaucrat inside a power company or a city government. As a consultant, you're a problem solver. And you're the one, when you sign your name and your seal, people trust you. So I think out of that is born the respect and also fear that you don't do things right. So I think it's the integrity of that process of consulting, in which you know that people are going to depend on your recommendations, your findings. And so it underlies a lot of what we do, is that will it stand the test of independent checking and legal issues and so on. And so I think that pervades into one's personal life too, is the consistency, because it's very hard to be inconsistent and be truthful. The integrity, doing what's right, and being aware of the larger context of a problem too, because often you're dealing, in my area, of stakeholders, which is the public. So your client may be just an agency, and there may be political conflicts and controversies, but you still have to understand that the user is the public. They pay the taxes, and that's who you eventually serve. And you have to be right by them. So yeah. And I happen to be fortunate in that I got to investigate a lot of failures. In investigating failures, there's something common about is somebody got complacent. It's always back to human error, human complacency and neglect. So that's why I feel it's a very human quality to do the right thing, and that integrity has to be very part of who you are as a consultant and as a person.
What are some of the goals or aspirations that you have for the future?
Well, I'm resigned to the fact, I don't mean that negatively, but I'm here in Westminster, OC. It just happens that we're in the house where our kids were, so that the grandkids can go to the same school district. And so we're here in Westminster. And the things that I used to speak about and advocate for, now I'm in a position to make happen from the inside. So my aspiration, Dan, is really to work with counterparts. It's not an easy thing to convene the right kinds of people, be very patient with the process, but do things that are transformational, that will allow us to be sensitive to climate action, that will help us to have more mobility choices so that we're not car dependent, more active type of transportation, what keeps us healthy. These are all things that are part of the new laws, the bipartisan infrastructure law. But policies and laws, one thing. To make it happen really takes grassroots level activism, as you know. And you get into not just community organizing, political, particularly business interests that may not be with you. So it's a complex process, and appreciating that and be able to navigate that and do something that can show outcome that credits the community. I think communities can, but it's just that very few understand the complexity of it and how to navigate through it and make things happen. That's my challenge now. I'm old enough to be patient and wise enough to know that it takes much more than me. And I'm happy to be convening a team that's very good in real estate development, in transportation, and hopefully you'll see results soon in our communities here in Central Orange County.
The final question is, what advice would you give to other Vietnamese diaspora who want to follow in your footsteps?
that's a big presumption that they want to follow in my footsteps because I may be outdated now. You know, there may be other priorities. I think this applies to all people. Actually, is really follow your heart. You know, what is your passion? What is it that you really want to do? What is it you're really good at? And how does that match up with what you really want to do? Because if you do that, you probably have no interest in retiring. You know, because there's always a demand. I know so many friends who says, I don't know how that way, you know. And so find out your passion, find out what you're really good at. Vietnamese, you know, to me, the uniqueness of being a Vietnamese American is the recent history. And I kindly eventually reconciled myself that I'm a Vietnamese American that understands the good fortune of coming to America, in which it's an ongoing experiment. You know, when you look at American history and how it was founded, it's an experiment. It's a promise. The Statue of Liberty inscription, you know, the promise of you're tired and you're heavy laden, come. And, it's a very worthy humanistic goal. But America would be hollow. You know, its promises in the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution would be hollow. It was not tested by people like you and me, you know, that come here and that, you know, naively believe in that and struggle to make sure that happens to our community and our people and our next generations. So I think we're part of the living experiment. And I think once you realize that, there's a kind of activism that gets triggered in you that can drive you to do unique things and perhaps great things that no one else can. And that's really personal. You know, it's all right to do wealth building and do whatever it is you do that makes you, you know, who you are. But I think there's something uniqueness if you can connect it to context and community and the good fortune of having lived through a war, you know, and survived and be around to have a Zencast like this, you know, so at my age. So thank you, Dan.
No, thank you for your time. Your words are wisdom and inspiration to all those that listen to this recording.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Pleasure is all mine.